I don't remember the exact day I met her. Memory has a strange way of softening the edges of beginnings. But I remember the light. It was one of those early spring afternoons when winter still lingers in the shade, but the sun has already begun to promise warmth. I remember the faint smell of rain on pavement, that damp scent of renewal that carries with it the sense that something in the world is quietly starting over. She was standing outside the university library, holding a book close to her chest, the wind pulling at her hair. There was nothing particularly dramatic about that moment. No music swelling, no lightning bolt of recognition, but something inside me took a small, deliberate pause. It was as if my mind wanted to memorize the scene before I even knew why. We spoke only briefly that day. Something about the book she was holding, I think, but the sound of her voice lingered. It wasn't just the tone, though it had this calm steadiness that drew you in. It was the way she looked directly at me when she spoke, unhurried, unguarded. There was no performance in her eyes. In a world where everyone seems to be half somewhere else, half distracted by invisible screens, she was entirely there. For weeks after that, I found myself looking for her without admitting it to myself. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of her at the cafe near the corner, sometimes in the quiet reading room of the library. I told myself it was coincidence, though part of me was beginning to suspect that I was shaping my own coincidences on purpose. When we finally sat down together, really sat down and talked, it was on a gray afternoon when the rain had driven almost everyone inside. We shared a small table by the window, the kind where you have to lean slightly forward to hear each other over the hum of conversation and the occasional clatter of cups. She spoke about her family, about how her mother kept old postcards on the refrigerator, about how she loved the smell of old paper because it reminded her of her grandfather's study. I told her things I rarely told anyone, about my tendency to overthink, my fear of being ordinary, my fascination with people who seem to find calm in chaos. That afternoon lasted hours. And though nothing particularly romantic happened, no hand reached across the table, no dramatic pause before a kiss, something shifted quietly. It was as if the world had expanded slightly to make room for her. In the days that followed, I started to notice small details that attached themselves to memory like pins on a map. The sound of her laugh, light, not forced, the kind that makes you want to laugh even when you don't know why. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The scent of her perfume, subtle and clean, like something that belonged outdoors. We didn't fall in love quickly. We eased into it the way a person wades into the ocean, not with a splash, but with cautious steps, testing the water, letting it rise slowly until you realize you're completely surrounded by it. Our early days were filled with little rituals. Saturday morning coffee at the same corner cafe, walks through the park with no destination, evenings spent sharing playlists, music as confession. There was a gentle rhythm to it all, the kind that made ordinary days feel like part of a larger story. I think what drew me to her most was not perfection, but presence. She had this way of paying attention to life that felt almost sacred. She noticed the way light shifted across a room during the day, how the sky changed shades between afternoon and dusk. She noticed when people were silent for too long, when they hesitated before answering. She saw what others missed, and somehow when I was with her, I began to see it too. Love, in those early months, felt simple. Not easy, but clear. It wasn't a question or a pursuit, it was a quiet understanding. We didn't talk about the future much. We didn't have to. Everything about the present felt enough. I remember the first time I realized I truly loved her. It wasn't during a romantic evening or an extraordinary event. It was a Tuesday. We were at her apartment, cooking pasta. The sauce burned slightly because we'd both forgotten about it while laughing at something stupid, one of those inside jokes that only two people in the world would understand. She looked at me, her face illuminated by the dull yellow of the kitchen light, her cheeks flushed from the heat. And in that moment, I felt this overwhelming sense of peace. Like I had finally arrived somewhere after years of wandering without knowing what I was looking for. That night, after she fell asleep, I watched her breathing, slow, steady, unself-conscious. The rain tapped softly against the window, and I thought, if this is what love is, I don't need anything else. Time has a way of moving gently when you're happy. Days melt into each other. We built a small world together, full of shared habits and quiet joys. Sunday mornings meant pancakes. Thursday nights meant movie marathons, always interrupted because we talked too much. We argued sometimes, about nothing important, usually. But even our disagreements had softness to them. We learned quickly that silence could wound more than words, so we never let it linger too long. Looking back now, I see that what we had in those early years wasn't just romance. It was friendship in its purest form. The kind of friendship that feels like safety. There was a summer when we decided to travel without planning anything. We packed our bags, got in the car, and drove wherever the road felt right.
No maps, no reservations.
Just instinct. We slept in small motels, ate at diners with names like Sunny's and Maple Grove. Sometimes we argued about directions. Sometimes we sang along to songs we barely knew. One night we pulled over by a lake and swam under the stars. The water was freezing, but she laughed so hard that I didn't care. I remember thinking, I'll remember this sound for the rest of my life. It wasn't all perfect. There were moments when fear crept in, fear of losing it, fear of the inevitable changes that time brings. I was still figuring out who I was, still trying to understand what it meant to build a life with someone. But she had this quiet assurance that steadied me. When I doubted, she stayed patient. When I hesitated, she waited. We grew together in ways I didn't recognize until much later. Love, I've learned, doesn't just shape what you feel, it reshapes who you are. There was a night in late autumn when we lay on the couch, half asleep, a candle flickering on the table. The room smelled of cinnamon and smoke. She whispered something then, something simple, like "I feel safe with you." It wasn't grand, it wasn't poetic, but it carried the weight of everything I'd ever wanted to hear. I didn't reply, I just held her tighter, because words felt unnecessary. Even now, years later, I can still see the candlelight dancing on her face, the soft rise and fall of her chest, the rhythm of her breathing syncing with mine. That was the season when life began to feel like a melody we'd both learned by heart. And maybe that's why the memory of it hurts in a sweet way, because it reminds me of a time when everything made sense without needing to be explained. I often think about those early days when the world still felt new. How easily we laughed, how little we knew about what awaited us. If I could go back, I wouldn't change a thing. Even the mistakes we made later, even the silences that came with time, they all began with that first spark of light outside the library on a cold afternoon. Sometimes people talk about falling in love as though it's a single moment, a sudden drop. But I think for me, it was a slow ascent, an upward unfolding. Every look, every small kindness, every shared secret was another step towards something larger. It began with a conversation, but what truly bound us were the quiet things. The shared glances in crowded rooms, the unspoken understanding when one of us was tired, the way her hand would find mine without needing to search for it. As months turned into years, the world around us changed. Jobs came and went, friends drifted in and out of orbit, but she remained a constant point of gravity in my life. We learned how to navigate uncertainty together, how to be patient with the unglamorous parts of love. I learned that love isn't about constant excitement, it's about quiet endurance. It's about waking up every day and choosing the same person, even when life feels heavy or ordinary. It's about seeing beauty in the repetition. There was one winter, maybe our third together, when I lost my job. I remember sitting on the floor of our apartment, surrounded by bills, feeling like a failure. She came home to find me there, angry at myself, ashamed. She didn't say much. She just sat beside me and placed her hand on my back, gentle and steady. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. No judgment, no advice, just faith. In that moment, I understood that love wasn't what happens when everything is easy. It's what survives when everything isn't. That winter taught me humility, but it also deepened something between us. We grew quieter, more deliberate. We learned to take joy in small things, a warm blanket, a shared meal, laughter over cheap wine. There's something about hardship that strips away the unnecessary, that leaves only what's real. Sometimes, when I think about those years, it feels like remembering another lifetime. The world outside has changed so much, and we've changed with it, but those early seasons of our love still live in me like pages that never age. If I close my eyes, I can still see her walking toward me through that early spring light. I can still feel the tremor of recognition in my chest, the quiet certainty that this was someone I would carry with me for the rest of my life. And I did. I still do. If part 1 was about discovery, part 2 was about endurance. Love, I learned, isn't only the quiet warmth of shared mornings or the thrill of laughter echoing through empty streets. It's also the labor of holding on to someone when life pulls you in different directions, when you are forced to confront the fragility of all you cherish. By the time the second part of our story began, we had already built a foundation of trust and intimacy that felt almost sacred. Yet, as with everything in life, certainty is an illusion. The real test came not in extraordinary events, but in the accumulation of ordinary challenges that together create a crucible for the heart. It started with work. My career, which had once felt like a promise, faltered under pressures I had not anticipated. Deadlines, demands, constant small failures. They began to weigh on me, and I carried that weight home. I had never been a man prone to openly share anxiety, but slowly, I found that it spilled over into our relationship. Irritation, impatience, avoidance. I could feel her patience fraying, though she never let it show, always meeting me with understanding even when I felt unworthy of it. There were nights when I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the subtle rhythm of her breathing beside me, trying to map out a path back to myself. I wondered if love could endure the kind of slow erosion that comes not from betrayal or cruelty, but from fatigue and disappointment. She, too, faced her own battles. There were family struggles I could never fully comprehend, financial pressures that seemed endless, quiet anxieties about health and future security. Yet she carried them with grace, not as a shield against me, but as a testament to her resilience. I remember watching her once in the kitchen, preparing dinner while her jaw tightened slightly at some unseen worry, and I thought, this is strength. This is the quiet courage of the everyday. We began to understand that love is not a fortress against hardship, it is the bridge you build to cross it together. There were arguments, of course. Small ones mostly, about money, about priorities, about whether to spend a Sunday at home or drive somewhere for no reason. I remember one evening when we stood in the kitchen, rain tapping against the window, voices raised slightly, tension stretching the air like a violin string ready to snap. But in that moment, I realized the argument itself wasn't the threat, our unwillingness to stay connected through it was. And we stayed connected. Always. Distance also tested us. I was offered a position that required me to travel extensively. It was an opportunity one couldn't refuse, and she, being the person she was, encouraged me to take it. But encouragement is not the same as comfort. Those months apart were quiet in their difficulty. Phone calls became lifelines. Emails, long and detailed, became the letters of our modern correspondence. And when we finally reunited, sometimes I felt as though we were strangers learning each other's contours again, relearning the rhythms we had so naturally inhabited before. One particular winter, during a week-long separation, I remember standing on the balcony of a hotel room in a city whose name I can barely recall now. The wind bit at my cheeks, and the city lights blurred in the rain. I was thinking about her, about how she would be at home, likely preparing a cup of tea just the way she liked it, probably humming some tune I didn't recognize. And I felt a pang that I had never felt before, not just missing her presence, but realizing how essential she had become to the stability of my life. The absence of her was a hollow space, but it also illuminated the depth of what I felt. And there were illnesses, small and then one larger scare. Not mine, but someone close to hers. Watching her navigate fear, balancing care with composure, was like seeing a different layer of her soul. Her strength wasn't ostentatious, it wasn't a loud proclamation. It was in the way she held herself steady when the world threatened to collapse, in the way she could sit in a hospital waiting room, quietly holding someone's hand, and still return home to check on me with the same attentive concern she always had. Through all of this, I learned patience I never thought I could possess. I learned that love requires waiting, not just for the joyous moments, but for the resilience to face the dull, grinding days. It requires faith that the person beside you, though imperfect, is worth every sacrifice. We discovered new depths of intimacy, not the kind that arrives in the first blush of romance, but the kind that arrives when you've witnessed vulnerability and fear and still choose to stay. One evening, I remember sitting on the porch, the air damp with the scent of late summer rain, and talking, not about dreams or hopes, but about mundane things, the way life was actually felt, the odd way her cat demanded attention, the difficulty of grocery shopping when everything seemed expensive, the discomfort of shoes that never fit right. And yet, in that banality, there was profound connection. We were no longer two separate people brushing against each other's lives. We were entwined. There were times when frustration crept in. Times when I caught myself resenting how much I depended on her for emotional stability, or how much I feared losing her. I would retreat into myself, worry spiraling quietly like smoke in a chimney. But she always found a way back in, not with grand gestures, but with quiet persistence. A touch on the shoulder, a shared glance, a simple "I'm here." Over and over, she reminded me that love is as much about showing up when nothing remarkable happens as it is about reveling in the remarkable moments. I think this was the period when I truly understood the nature of enduring love. It's not the fireworks or the poetry, it's the continuity, the persistence, the way two people learn to inhabit the same world without diminishing each other. We celebrated small victories together, me finishing a challenging project, her overcoming a particularly difficult week. We held each other through failures, lost jobs, bad news, moments of personal despair. And slowly, those moments, strung together, became the latticework of our shared life. We also learned to forgive, not just each other, but ourselves. There were times I said things I shouldn't have, let petty irritations guide my words, and moments when she was terse or impatient. But through the years, we learned the art of apology that doesn't simply erase mistakes but acknowledges them and strengthens trust. That was love in practice, the commitment to see the other human fully, flaws included, and to remain devoted anyway. As the years passed, life continued to test us, not always with drama, but with the slow erosion of time. Careers changed, friends moved on, and the world itself seemed to spin faster than we could follow. Yet, in all of this, she remained my constant, my anchor. We grew to understand that love's true power lies not in the extraordinary moments, but in the ordinary ones. The mornings spent quietly drinking coffee together, the evenings reading side by side, the way our hands found each other naturally when we walked, the unspoken rhythm of life that only we shared. There were days of silence, of fatigue, of the unremarkable struggles that mark any long journey together. And yet, these were the days that mattered most. They revealed a depth of companionship that exhilaration and passion alone never could. I found that love, enduring love, does not need constant proof. It grows quietly, in repetition, in patience, in the choice to return to each other after every small misunderstanding, every fear, every failure. One afternoon, years into our shared life, I watched her sit by the window, light spilling across her hair, and I realized something profound. Even after all this time, I was still discovering her. The curves of her thoughts, the subtleties of her moods, the hidden humor in her smile, all of it felt alive, always unfolding. And I understood that love's endurance is not about having nothing new to learn about the other. It's about staying willing to learn, to notice, to be present, again and again. We began to celebrate the simple victories together, not as grand gestures, but as quiet acknowledgments, a completed project, a birthday remembered, a difficult week survived. We learned to mark our years not with extravagance, but with intimacy, patience, and the comforting constancy of shared life. Love was in the small acts, the meal prepared just the way she liked it, the cup of tea brought to my desk when she saw me absorbed in work, the touch of her hand when words were unnecessary. These were the moments that stitched the fabric of our life together. And yet, love also demanded courage. To remain vulnerable, to continue investing in someone despite the knowledge that time would test you, that uncertainty could shake the ground beneath your feet, that was the challenge. There were nights when I lay awake, feeling the weight of all that could be lost, imagining the fragility of her presence in my life, and in those nights I learned gratitude. Gratitude for her, for the shared years, for the ordinary and extraordinary, for the unremarkable moments that had become miraculous simply because she was in them. It is in this accumulation of years that I came to see the quiet miracle of enduring love. We had endured the mundane, the fear, the distance, the uncertainties, the gradual passage of time, and emerged with something that felt both simple and miraculous, a connection that was steady, tender, and resilient. We understood that love is not a feeling that burns brightest at the beginning, but a flame that continues to glow when all else flickers, when life moves quietly around it. In the evenings, we often sat together on the porch, hands brushing, watching the world shift from day to night, feeling the calm that only shared presence can bring. I would reflect on the path that had led us here, on the small steps, the patience, the laughter, the quiet endurance, and I would feel a profound sense of peace. This was not the explosive, breathless passion of youth, but something richer, something enduring, nurturing, and infinite in its own way. When I think of her now, decades later, I see not only the woman I first met in that sunlit spring afternoon, holding a book close to her chest, but the companion, the confidant, the steady heart that walked beside me through all the trials life could offer. And I realize that love, enduring love, is not measured by excitement or drama, but by constancy, by courage, by the conscious choice to remain present for another human being, day after day, year after year. Sometimes, in the quiet of our home, when the house is filled only with the hum of life, our cat stretching on the windowsill, the kettle's whistle, the rustle of leaves outside, I glance at her and feel the same awe I felt all those years ago. And I understand fully that the life we have built, the ordinary and the extraordinary intertwined, is the truest testament to love's resilience. I have learned that love is not a destination, it is a journey without end. And in her presence, I have discovered that the heart, when fully committed, can hold more than it ever thought possible: joy, sorrow, patience, gratitude, and wonder, all at once. And so we continue side by side, facing the slow passage of time, savoring the quiet and enduring moments that together define a life well loved.